Bendición, and what up, everybody? Sorry for the shitty lighting. Just a guy with his phone. So let's dive into it. So there's so much to share about this particular historical figure. I just want to say, I have my computer here. There's so much to share, but I will do my best to touch on the highlights of this man's life. I encourage all of you, like all of my subjects that I do research on, to do your own research into this man, on his influence on the Black American Ocha community and Ocha as a whole, as there are definitely non-Black Americans that are involved in Isheshelagba Ocha. Okay? So this video is about, the full title, His Royal Highness Walter Eugene King Oba Efuntola Oseijiman Adelabu Adefunmi the First. If I butchered the name, I'm sorry. For the sake of time, for the most part, I will just be referring to this man as Walter King. In actuality, when referring to a king, be it dead or alive, you say the name followed by Gabiesi. So, you say the full name, Efuntola Adefunmi the First, Gabiesi. This is to denote his status as a king. Walter King is the founder and the first king of the Oyotunji village located in Sheldon, South Carolina. Oyotunji means Oyo rises again, or Oyo returns, Oyo being a major influence of Yoruba culture and religion. And yes, this title of king, Walter Eugene King, he's the king, that just coincidentally happens to be his last name, King. But this title that he's known as the King of Oyotunji is actually formally recognized by the Oni Ife, and without the approval of the Oni Ife, of recognizing this title, there is no Alafin, or in this case, there is no Oba. Okay, so don't mind me. I'm trying to get all this done in one take. Okay, Walter Eugene King, Efuntola. There are some sources that say Ofuntola, some that say Efuntola. Efuntola is whiteness, or like Efun, that powder, cascarilla, that brings honor. It's a metaphor for Obatala brings me honor. If the name is indeed Ofuntola, then it indicates that the Odu that's on, that was on his head, was Ofun 10, Mewa. Whether it's Efuntola or Funtola, I don't know. Hopefully somebody out there can confirm either or. Walter King, born 1928, died 2005, was made on August 26. Actually, not even like today, maybe tomorrow, I don't know. It might be today. 1959, in Matanzas, Cuba. He was made to Obatala with Cristobal Oliana Obailumi by Mario Burgoy Ogunyobi, who was made by Mario Reyes Rodriguez Chango Sonaba. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. The initiation of Walter King made him, along with this other gentleman, Christopher, made them the first two Black Americans initiated to Cuban Ocha in the history of the entire religion, since it began in 1864 with the first consecration of an Olorisha by the name of Josefa Herrera Pepa Echu B. Continuing on, before I dive deeper into Walter King's life, I want to set the stage for the time period that we are talking about this historical figure, because we are no longer talking about slave plantation times with Latuan, Efuche, Mamonserrate, Obadimeji, and so on and so forth, Adechina. We're not talking about the 1860s. Instead, our story resides in modern United States at the height of the civil rights movement. At the time, between the 1960s and the 1980s, there was indeed racism from Cubans and New Yorkers towards Black Americans initiating into Cuban Santería. I want to point this out, that for the sake of this video, there is a difference between black and black American. I say this because being a black Puerto Rican or black Cuban was fine, and that was normal within Santería. But being a black American was looked down upon between the 1960s all through the 80s, and some even say even after that into the 90s, and even maybe even after that. So with that being said, Oyotunji, the construction of Oyotunji that Walter King created, we're going to dive deeper into that. But Oyotunji is that response against that racism towards black Americans by the Latinos, by the Cubans, by the Puerto Ricans, and by the New Yorkers. Remember that in the 70s, there was Black Harlem and there was Spanish Harlem, and the majority demographic of Cubans and Puerto Ricans were located in the South Bronx, Spanish Harlem, and a very large population of Cubans lived in Union City, New Jersey, which is not far from New York City. The Latinos were calling the black Americans monos, and the black Americans were calling the Puerto Ricans Germans and Spics and what have you. But in the 1960s and 70s, with the Black Panther movement, with the Black Power movement, with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and yes, even gentlemen like Walter Eugene King, there was a push for the upliftment of the black identity, and religion was a part of that movement and cultural shift. So, black Americans turned to Islam. Black Americans turned to the 5%ers and what's today's mathematics. Black Americans turned to more African. I don't like that word African because Africa is it's a continent, not a country, but more African, more just African spirituality. And a small percentage turned to ATRs, African traditional religions. Walter Eugene King actually collaborated with a woman by the name of, her nickname Asuncion Serrano Batalao Saunco, Asunta, who is another major influence in the initiation of black Americans. She is a woman who is my great-grandmother in Ocha, and someone who I can and will definitely do a video on. She was actually Puerto Rican. And she contributed towards the spike in black Americans being initiated, as well as Oyadina. He was an Oba Oriente. But I digress. So, His Royal Highness Oba King Efuntola Osejiman Adelabu Adefunmi I was born Walter Eugene King on October 28th in Detroit, Michigan, the United States. Long story short, at some point as a child, maybe like 15 years old, he came across a National Geographic magazine that covered West African peoples, cultures, and religion. And this was the catalyst to his journey into the ATRs at this point, because like many black Americans, he was raised Baptist. He even had preachers in his own family. Yeah, don't mind me. Like, I'm doing all this on the computer. I want to make sure I'm organized. So I don't have it here in my notes, but I want to point out that he at some point asked his mother, I want to say like when he was 15 years old, what happened to the African God. And his mother replied something to the effect of, the African God, like they don't exist or they're not around anymore, something like that. So I think it's interesting. He was a young man. He was a child at the least, at most a teenager, 15 years old, questioning, okay, so I have this Jesus that keeps getting pushed down my throat, but I have this interest, this innate interest in West African tradition. Okay, let's continue. So he originally began not with Orisha, but with Haitian voodoo, interestingly enough, around the age of 20. He went to Haiti and got initiated and tried to get voodoo rooted in Black Harlem. Remember, there's Spanish Harlem and there's Black Harlem. Now it's just Harlem, but in the day, it was Black Harlem, Spanish Harlem, and you did not cross the lines because the blacks was going to shoot the Puerto Ricans and the Puerto Ricans were going to shoot the blacks. So he went to Haiti, got initiated into voodoo, and tried to bring voodoo into Black Harlem. And he founded, actually, the Order of Dambala Wedo, Ancestors Priests organization in Harlem around 21 years of age. But it did not take off. Haitian voodoo did not take off. It was not popular. Side note, I believe this to be the reason why most black Americans are into Orisha religion and not Haitian voodoo, simply because Haitian voodoo was not popular. His goal of bringing, when I say his goal, Walter Eugene King's goal of bringing Haitian voodoo to Harlem was a flop, and it was unsuccessful, at least within popularity. It was successful to a point, and we will eventually see, at least outwardly, that Walter King abandons his Haitian voodoo religious ties in favor for the more popular Ifa, and more specifically Yoruba Ifa, not Cuban Ifa. And it is Yoruba Ifa that takes precedence in his life and in forming Oyotunji. And it's cool to think that, because I can't say I know, but the organization that was based on Haitian voodoo that he brought back to Harlem, he called it the Order of Dambalawedo. So there's maybe a 99% chance that the main loa that Walter Eugene King was initiated to is Dambalawedo, who is the basically the Obatala of the Haitian voodoo pantheon. I'm not saying they are the same, just saying what Obatala is to the Orisha, Dambalawedo is to the loa of Haitian voodoo. Continuing on. So Walter King established the Yoruba temple in the 1960s. I have here the 1960s. I probably meant to actually put 1960, 1961, or 1962. Most likely 1960, which attracted black activists, poets, playwrights like Amiri Baraka and Queen Mother Moore. I've never heard of them, but that was what I found in my research. So maybe you've heard of these particular individuals, Amiri Baraka and Queen Mother Moore. Walter Eugene King helped organize the first African Pride Parade in New York. He introduced the dashiki and began a small-scale manufacturer of African attire in the summer of 1960. Small scale. He founded the Yoruba Academy for the Academic Study of Yoruba History, Religion, and Language in 1961. In 1962, he opened the Ujama Market. I'm butchering these titles. Beginning the trend, so he started small, but then he opened up a large market in 1962, which began the trend that we know today, that still continues to this day, of African boutiques. Things like the dashiki in the Black American communities, the djembe drums. They sold head wraps. They sold loose-fitting garbs. They sold the wooden African pendants. The girls wearing the African pendant earrings, and that's what we saw take off in the Black Power movement. He is one of, if not the reason why these things exist, and it started in New York with Walter King. And Walter King himself, he would wear the long flowing robes that he was wearing all the time. He was dressed like that in the 1960s. Before it was cool, before it was popular, he was rocking dashikis. And then he just said, yo, this is my contribution. I want to make a market for to represent the Black experience, the Black American experience. And he brought it to the forefront. Continuing on, Walter King was actually a passionate dancer as well. As a matter of fact, in 1977, when Roots premiered, the Roots that we all know and love, premiered, you can see Oyotunji residents dancing in a scene. What scene that actually is, I don't know. And I couldn't show you here because then I would get copyrighted striked. But there's a scene where you can see Oyotunji residents dancing in a scene that Walter Eugene King produced. Now, the article that I took that from, it said that he produced it. I assume that he choreographed it as well, unless they actually meant choreographed when they said produced, because he was a dancer. At age 20, more on his dancing background, Walter King, at age 20, he joined the Catherine Dunham Dance Company in New York, and these dances often included songs for the Orisha, and they performed in places like Egypt and Haiti. Now, I have no concrete proof for this next statement, but I think it's a healthy guess that I can make, that this is where Walter King took advantage of his time in Haiti and got initiated into Haitian voodoo. Now, it seems like Walter Eugene King, he did a lot between 1959 and 1963. From 1959, he got initiated into Cuban Ocha, and within like a span of 3-4 years, he was just creating all of these organizations and doing really, really big things at a young age. We're talking about a 20-year-old. Like, between 19 years old and 25, he was just getting initiated into different religions and traveling the world and dancing and meeting influential Black Americans. Huge stuff. It's like an incredible life this man lived. Let's fast forward. Let's go into the fall of 1970. 1970, he founds the Yoruba village of Oyotunji in Beaufort County, South Carolina, and began the careful reorganization of the Orisha voodoo priesthood along traditional Nigerian lines. Orisha voodoo priesthood, keep in mind, the focus was on Orisha. There is definitely voodoo influence, and that could be a whole video in itself. That's a whole topic, whether there was was and is sancocho between Haitian voodoo, Orisha, Isheshelagba, Lukumi. That's a whole video in itself. But this is what the article said, okay? So, he was initiated to Ifa, traditional Isheshelagba Ifa, by the Oluo of Ijeun at Abeokuta, Nigeria, in August 1972. So he made Ocha in 1959. I think before that, a little after that, he had Haitian voodoo. So he made Haitian voodoo and then Ocha, or vice versa, one of those. And maybe, yeah. So the dates, the exact dates, definitely do your own research. You're going to find some conflicting stories of when he did what. Either way, he was involved in Haitian voodoo. He was involved in Ocha around the same time. But he didn't get involved into Isheshelagba Ifa until August of 1972. And he went to Abeokuta. Baba Adefunmi, Walter Eugene King, was proclaimed the Alashe, the Oba, of the Yoruba of North America at Oyotunji village in 1972. He and his son, the son that Adefunmi II, were formerly the one who's recently deceased. Both of them were recognized by the Oni-Ife. This is what gives the king of Oyotunji the power that he wields to hold the title as king. If it were not for the Oni-Ife, it would just be some guy who owns a plot of land and he just calls himself, I'm the king of this plot of land. And it would hold no actual weight. But the reason why him being the king of Oyotunji holds any weight at all, because I know like a lot of people are thinking like, I could just buy a plot of land and call myself, I could just call myself the king. But he has the formal recognition of the Oni-Ife. Let's see. Okay, continuing on. Walter Eugene King, was married several times during his lifetime and fathered 6 princes and 16 princesses. Some other highlights to include. Remember, I'm just trying to get, he lived such a long, event-filled life. I'm really just trying to hit the highlights here. Some other highlights that include that Oyotunji is among the first to initiate Olokun to the head directly, as they follow the Isheshelagba tradition. Now, that whole thing about whether Olokun can be placed on the head directly or not directly, there's a whole debate. As far as I know, the old school Cubans say Olokun he's not done direct, he's done oro. But in Isheshelagba, he definitely is done direct. But there's been a merger between, now you got Lukumi priests saying that he can be done direct, but don't want to say that, well, that's more Isheshelagba influence. It's just a whole thing. This video is not about that. But Isheshelagba is in Oyotunji, and the initiation styles that they do is not Lukumi. They do things Isheshelagba. Another little point to highlight is that the path of Obatala of Walter Eugene King is Ogiyan. more famously called Ochagian. That was his path of Obatala, which is really cool because that's my path as well. Ochagian is a common path. The only one more common than Ochagian is Ayaguna. So let's see. Okay, as a response to move away. So here's another. Let's move on. As a response to moving away from traditional Cuban Ifa and towards a more pure Isheshelagba identity, Walter Eugene King declared that within Oyotunji, within his kingdom, there would be no Catholic imagery to be exhibited in his Ile as a religious house, in his Egbe as a religious house, or in Oyotunji in his kingdom as a whole. Kept this practice going on for another 35 years since the founding of Oyotunji. And this has been the norm and indeed the tradition of that house and that lineage. Anybody who comes from Walter Eugene King, anybody who comes from the lineage of Oyotunji when they got involved, there is an exclusion of all Catholic elements, all as well as influences of Espiritismo, like some say obligatory 3 misas before Ocha. This was done away with. There is no Catholic imagery. You go to Oyotunji, there is nothing Catholic. There is no talk of Espiritismo. The closest thing you get to Espiritismo and the muertos and guías espirituales is Egun. There is Egungun. That is it. You're not going to find no white tables with glasses of water and all that. No. Walter Eugene King purposely distanced himself from anything having to do with Catholicism, anything having to do with Espiritismo, and anything having, as we'll see later, anything having to do with Palo. Let's fast forward. We went from 1970 now to 1996. The Miami Herald called Walter Eugene King, quote, the father of Yoruban cultural restoration movement. At the time in 2023, just a year ago, now we're nearing 2025, so almost 2 years ago, only 25 people actually called Oyotunji home. Oyotunji, at its peak of popularity in the 1980s, had actually a few hundred inhabitants. So a few hundred, that means between maybe 220 to 300 people. On, I can't remember exactly how many acres of land. They have like 30 acres of land. It's pretty big. How many people actually call Oyotunji home? I don't know. I mean, today. Maybe 20 or 30, but in 2023, it was only 25. And that 25 inhabitants, it must have included the recently deceased king, Adefunmi II, and his wives, and his children. When I went there, there were maybe 10 people that I met there that were not related to the king, but instead were elders, chiefs, if you will, that were not related to the king, and just regular people that chose to stay and were accepted. To my knowledge, you can't just say you want to live there and expect free room and board. You have to work, you have to show up, you have to prove yourself to be a productive member of this micro society that they have over there. So at this point, how many people actually live in Oyotunji? I don't know. But in 2023, it was 25 people. The last thing I want to touch on this man's hell of a journey in life. He accomplished a lot. I find it interesting that in all of my research, even on official Oyotunji websites, affiliates, news articles, YouTube videos of tours, there is zero mention of exactly who initiated Walter Eugene King to Cuban Ocha and who initiated him in Haitian Voodoo. Just that he did indeed get initiated, and that he was initiated to Obatala in Matanzas, Cuba. That is it. Even in the video tours of Oyotunji, the village elders, the tour guides, they never say who initiated Walter Eugene King. And the only reason why I am able to definitively cite exactly who initiated Walter Eugene King is because Walter Eugene King was initiated with Cristobal Oliani Obailumi, who I believe was made to Agayu. This Cristobal Oliana, is the godfather of the renowned scholar and author John Mason, a black American, who traveled to Cuba and meticulously studied and outlined Lucumí religion since the 1980s. And it is Dr. John Mason who mentions in his book, Orin Orisha, Songs for the Selected Heads, it's a wonderful book, he mentions that his padrino, Cristobal Oliana, was made by Mario Bugoy Ogunyobi. And since we know that Cristobal was made with Walter Eugene King, we also know that the padrino of Walter Eugene King is Mario Bugoy Ogunyobi. And in addition, instead of traveling back, let's put this over here. Instead of traveling back to Cuba, we know that Walter Eugene King went to Nigeria to continue his Orisha studies and his initiation into Ifa. He went to Abeokuta. So what happened to the relationship between Walter Eugene King and his Cuban padrino, we can only speculate. If I had to take a guess, I suspect it's similar to the relationship between Philip John Neymark, who is Afagba Mila Ogunda Bede Ibaye. This gentleman is a white man, a white Jewish man from the Ifa Foundation in Florida, a organization that is still going on to this day. This man, Philip John Neymark, and his padrino of Ifa, Hector Rodriguez, where the student, i.e. the godchild, decided to stray away from Cuban traditions, to abandon the Cuban ways, and create his own version of what he thought Orisha practices should be. This is what I believed happened between Walter Eugene King, much like John Neymark. I would think that it was looked down upon by the Cubans to see Walter Eugene King, a black American, get made to Cuban Ocha at a time where Cubans were already hesitant. We're talking 1959 into the 60s and 70s, at a time where Cubans were already hesitant to even associate with black Americans, same thing with Puerto Ricans, let alone initiate any of them. And to see Walter Eugene King, to start to implement more pure Yoruba Isheshelagba into these Cuban practices. Now, it may be hard to believe by today's standards, but put yourself in the mind of, we're talking about the 1960s, the Black Power movement. It may be hard to believe, but the mixture of a more pure Yoruba Ocha and Ifa into Cuban Ocha Ifa was indeed seen as sancocho by the old Cubans, including people like Miguel Febles, very famous Odica. Miguel Febles Odica, very famous Babalao. People like him, from the elders of his day. I lost my spot. Pardon me. So it's hard to believe that the mixture, yada yada. So it was seen as sancocho by the old Cubans, to see the mixture between Lucumí and Isheshelagba. And the cherry on top was that instead of dressing in all white like the Cubans, these black Americans want to dress in dashikis. They want to say alafia instead of bendición. They want to make olokun to the head direct. They want to disconnect themselves from the Cubans, from the Catholic saints. They disregard espiritismo. They disregard palo. And they want to implement, like people like John Neymark, want to implement New Age ideals and customs with New Age practices that we see his wife, Iya Vasa, continue to this day. This was seen as disrespectful in the 1980s. I'm not saying that. I make the comparison with Philip John Neymark because it's similar, but I mean, if you check out my Sancocho series on Philip John Neymark and what they have going on there, the Ifa Foundation, they went completely left field and are doing some crazy stuff. Check out the video on my Sancocho series of the Ifa Foundation. I know you will find it absolutely intriguing. So I'm not saying that Walter Eugene King started to implement New Age ideals, but it's the same concept of we are going to move away from Cuban Ifa and Cuban Ocha in favor for this more pure Yoruba. So let's see. So as far as Walter Eugene King, we can only speculate. I assume that his padrino, Mario, is dead. Walter Eugene King himself has been dead for going on 20 years. He died in 2005. And whatever feelings anyone had towards each other, good, bad, indifferent, it's irrelevant now because everybody we're talking about resides in Orun at this point. Orun in the air, Orun in the earth, whatever, Orun. They're all dead. So this series is just analyzing these historical figures and the lives that they led and the influences that they had in Ocha as a whole. But, you know, I think because he was such a Walter Eugene King had just such a pride for being black American, I would be remiss to not also say the influence that he had on the black American experience in Ocha. That was his biggest contribution to Ocha as a whole. I hope you all enjoyed this video and learned something new. If there's any personal experiences that you have ever had personally with Walter Eugene King, with Oyotunji, with Cristobal Oleana, with Philip John Neymark, with any of these people that I've named who have been influential. You know, even, you know, the video is not about him, but Philip John Neymark, influential and more infamous than famous, but influential nonetheless. But this video is about Walter Eugene King. Ibaye la yento nu. Walter Eugene King, efuntola. And it's been a pleasure to do research on this gentleman, especially after the news of you know, just the horrific news of what went down over in Oyotunji, the death of his son and everything, just 2 weeks ago maybe. So that's the reason why I want to make this specific videos. I hope you enjoyed it. And let me know if there's anybody else in particular that you want me to cover in this series. Bendición, and que oloro nagbeo. Peace out.